The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. And the true mind of the Tathagata is no other than our own mind. Even though the Tathagata, which is the name by which the Buddha called himself, lived more than 2,500 years ago. How can that be? And then there is the face before our parents were born, which is the same face, the same essence, the undying, unborn essence of who we are. It's a very complex weaving, and it takes time to really absorb it, to really understand it, to really experience it. But it is worth it. Today is the first day of this 7-day sesshin in June 2023. It's the last sesshin until September here, because during the summer we have the Regaining Balance retreats for women veterans with PTSD. But we've had many sesshins already: January, February, March, April, May, and now this one. And in the fall, we will again go into that concentrated period of practice with September, October, November, Rohatsu, and then begin again with January, February, and so on. Life is so short. The exploration is so exciting once we get a handle on it. Initially, of course, we're struggling because we have this idea that we have to be a certain way. We're looking for a certain thing. But in reality, right here now, exploring the moment as it appears to be, as it feels to be, not intellectually, not analytically, but how it is experienced in this moment. And so it takes the bite out of frustration and disappointment and all the other kinds of things that can come up for us in practice. We can really cut to the chase if we tune in right from the very beginning and don't try to get somewhere to something, because there's no somewhere to go and no something to get to. It's all right here now in this very moment. Even as when the Buddha lived more than 2,500 years ago, that is this very one moment as well. Right here now. Not so easy to grasp. There was a monk who had spent decades studying and writing commentaries on the Diamond Sutra, which is a very short sutra, a very deep sutra, speaking to exactly this kind of thing. And he was traveling. He had heard that the sixth patriarch was preaching a different way of being. And he was quite incensed at this. After all, shouldn't sutras be analyzed? Shouldn't they be picked apart and figured out? Well, he'd heard that in the South there was somebody not doing that and was highly respected and was using a different tact and bringing people to awakening. So he was marching down to meet with this infidel and tell him a thing or two. And as he was coming south, and of course in those days in China, this is quite a long time ago, people didn't really have conveyances unless they were quite wealthy, in which case they might have ridden horses or been carried in palanquins. And everybody else walked. There weren't even bicycles. So he walked. And of course, it took him a long, long, long time to walk. And after days and days and days of walking, he came upon an elderly woman selling what are known as mind refreshers. They are also known as monju, after Manjusri, the Bodhisattva of wisdom. And she said to the monk, "What do you got in your backpack there?" And he said, pulling himself up, announced, "I'm traveling to the south to meet with this person who is denying the truth of the Diamond Sutra." And she said, "Oh, well, if you can tell me an answer to something that's in the Diamond Sutra, since you know it so well, I will give you, as a gift, a mind refresher, one of these little sweet rice cakes." And she said then, in the Diamond Sutra, it says, past mind cannot be grasped, present mind cannot be grasped, future mind cannot be grasped. Then, which mind are you planning to refresh? And it stumped him. But it caused him to question himself. Maybe he didn't have the final word on the Diamond Sutra. Maybe there was something deeper. And so finally, when he met the master, he became his student. And he actually ended up burning all his commentaries on the Diamond Sutra. I'd like to share with you now something I've shared many times, and this is some of the words of Huang Po, who is also in Japanese known as Obaku, teacher of Rinzai. He was a rather imposing looking person. Apparently he was quite tall, and he had an odd-shaped forehead. It seemed like he had almost like a bulbous forehead, something in the middle of his forehead kind of sticking out. There are some that said that that was a kind of a result of doing so many prostrations. He'd go down with his head, and so gradually he got this lump on his head. It's hard to know. At any rate, he was also very deeply realized. And here he's pointing at what I was saying at the beginning of this teisho. Let me share it. All Buddhas and ordinary beings are nothing but the one mind. The one mind. Everything is one. Everything is one. That's half the story. This mind is beginningless and endless, unborn and indestructible. It has no color or shape, neither exists nor doesn't exist, isn't old, new, long or short, large or small, since it transcends all measures. It is what you see in front of you. Start to think about it, and immediately you're mistaken. The Prajnaparamita, the heart of perfect wisdom, which is the core teaching of the most advanced teaching of the Buddha, in essence is saying the same thing. No eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, no color, sound, smell, taste, touch, or what the mind takes hold of, nor even act of sensing, no ignorance, nor end of it. How can there be no ignorance and yet no end of ignorance? And so on and so forth. This really was my first koan, even though theoretically I was working on Mu. Mu I had no particular connection to, but this one really grabbed me. How can form be empty? How come this table, which is certainly solid, is also empty at the same time. It's a deep level of understanding when you are able to experience that as the truth. And when you experience that as the truth, then you become quite a bit more free. It's not something, as that monk learned from the old woman, something that can be thought about, understood through analysis. However, the way to reach it is to feel, and in the feeling to explore. And when I say feel, I don't mean emotional experience. Are we not very loud? Shannon, can you see what's going on here? Daishin's having problems.
I checked it earlier. Oh, maybe. Is it okay, Daishin? Can you give a thumbs up if you can hear? Oh, he can hear.
Okay.
Sorry. And it's audio okay. It's okay for Justin too.
Okay, great. So when we do the extended out breath, for example, we're not thinking our way down the breath. We're experiencing our way down the breath with curiosity, with an openness to how it actually feels sensationally in our body, and without any felt need, hopefully, or if there is a felt need, then feel that sense as well of any kind of coloration. In other words, when we are breathing out, we simply breathe out, but there is stuff going on in our body. There is perception. What is that perception? What are those sensations? And you don't have to say, okay, I don't like it, I do like it. It's big or small or uncomfortable or whatever. You just experience it and explore that experience. For example, where's the one that is feeling that experience? And is that experience saying something? Of course, not in words, but we communicate in many, many different ways. And words are an extremely limited form of communication. It's kind of interesting that in Japan, one of the admired aspects of a conversation is when, contrary to the American version of this, when two people are talking and they finish each other's sentences. Now, we in America would get incensed by that, but it would seem like an imposition, but it's considered a very high level of understanding. If one can actually finish a sentence for someone, that means you're really right there with them. It's that level of experience, only we're not doing it with words. We're doing it with physical experience and an exploration of that physical experience. Ongoing. It begins to get more and more interesting, and we begin to forget ourselves through it. Classically, the instruction for practice, at least in the beginning when I was first practicing, was you just focus on that mu, and you shut everything else out. But one day, in the middle of a sesshin, I recognized, as we're going around with Kinhin, and he is still sitting on the tan, totally absorbed, that Gordy Bruin was indeed totally absorbed. As opposed to most of the rest of us, going around in Kinhin, or who were probably struggling with what was going on in our heads and trying to make our minds behave in ways we assumed that we were being instructed to have them behave. At the end of the sesshin, Gordy had had a Kensho experience. And he said to me, why didn't somebody tell me it's all about exploring your own mind? And of course, that means exploring the experience, the whole rich and deep experience of consciousness. It's not about trying to make your mind into some kind of ideal mind state that you think it ought to be in as a person of practice. Yet, that's where we so often go in our Zen practice. Let go and explore. Let yourself fall into the moment's experience. Of course, notice when you're resistant to it. Notice when you may have positive or negative feelings about it, but don't go there. Just notice. And keep reaching deeper. Keep exploring more completely. It's a little bit like having this amazing, complex tapestry that is your own mind. And what you're doing is gradually unweaving it and seeing what's beyond, what's beneath. Through that, over time, we begin to see where we're caught in what we're calling attachments, clinging, where we want things to be a certain way, where we don't want things to be a certain way, where we want to be recognized, where we want to be admired, where we don't want to be told what to do, when we don't want to be told that what we're doing is not as helpful as it could be, all of those kinds of things. And we can reach that. And that place is incredibly freeing. It is our true mind. And when we can open fully to our true mind, there is nothing that can catch us. You've heard so many times here of Jacques Lucéran, the French man who was sent to Buchenwald when he was 19 years old as a person who had, he wasn't exactly a spy, he was a betrayer of the Nazis, although he was French. And he was blind, and as a result of that, he was quite perceptive. His blindness had happened when he was a child, and so he had plenty of time to explore, since he didn't have his eyes to determine what he was seeing. He was able to employ a deeper level, a broader level, a more full experience of what he was seeing. One of the things you can do to help enhance that ability in your own life is to go out at night without a flashlight and kind of feel your way around. There's a member here who many years ago was with a friend, and they were out in the forest, the deep forest actually, and they were so interested in what they were doing that they didn't happen to notice that it was beginning to get dark and there was a long way back to their vehicle. But they turned around and felt their way back, not reaching out and touching trees, but sensing. Of course, they had walked along a stream. There was no path, by the way. They had walked along a stream, so there was the sound of the stream that they could follow. But, there were fallen branches. There were places where the stream made a sharp angle and things like that. They didn't fall in the stream. They didn't bump into any trees or trip over any logs. and they made it back to their truck without any harm or any negative experiences. We have that ability. At any rate, back to Jacques. He was spared from the immediate execution because one of the intake prisoners whispered to him to say that he was a translator. At that time, he knew French, and though he didn't admit it, he knew German, and but he said he was a translator of French and Polish and some other language. And by the time he left the camp, he knew those languages. He was familiar with them enough that he could indeed translate. But the first 5 months were a hell realm. The whole place was a hell realm for everyone, really. They were richly starved. He was housed in what was known as the Invalids Block, which was a barracks where 400 men would have been crowded, and instead there were 1,000 in there. People that the Nazis didn't feel warranted being alive. And eventually, he grew so ill, he was taken away to die. Because he had been blind, the other prisoners, desperate for food, would steal his bread. So he had even less to eat than the others did. And so they carried him away outdoors. By then it was spring, so it was warm enough, and laid him down to die. And what he said about that was that he took advantage of that to leave Buchenwald. That doesn't mean that he dissociated. That meant that he was so present with what was going on in his body that who he thought he was, what he thought he needed to be safe, to be happy, disappeared. And what came forth was a reckoning, which we call awakening. He did survive, which is how we know the story. This is a true story. And when he was back in the barracks, no one stole his bread anymore. He was a beacon of light, peace, and joy for all the others, and they would lead him to people who were freaking out because he could bring them peace. He had seen what all of us are looking for. What Mitra-roshi understood as all I needed to do was simply to receive. In order to be able to say that, he had to let go a lot of other things, because you can't simply receive if you've got ideas about what you want to receive or what you don't want to receive, what you do want to have coming to you, what you don't want to have coming to you. But he had let that go, as Jacques had let go also the same, as everyone can let go that attachment to a self-image that is fake. It seems real, it seems solid, it seems like it's something that we really need to support, that we depend upon, that gets embarrassed, that gets frightened, that gets hurt, that gets angry. But it's just a story. The story is a collection of assumptions around what has happened to us in our life from the very beginning, from the moment we were born. If we were born into a happy, loving, caring family with no untoward events, we learn that the world can be trusted, that we will be safe. If we were born into a family that is torn apart by violence, by grief, by abandonment, we learn that the world is not safe. that we won't be taken care of, that we're in danger of disappearing, dying in any moment. Many years ago, during the Vietnam War, came the story, the report, really, it wasn't a story, it was a report, that babies in the Vietnamese orphanages were dying. Healthy babies were simply turning their faces to the wall and dying. Why? Because the orphanage personnel were so overwhelmed, they simply could not pick up and nurture every single child in that orphanage. And when they didn't get nurtured, when they felt abandoned, they simply left. As we grow in our experiences, if we are like those children who didn't get true care, then we begin to feel abandoned. And if there's no one else, not a teacher, not a friend of a parent, a friend of a schoolmate, when there's no one else in our life that can give us that honoring, that support, that recognition that we do belong in this universe, then we tend to dissociate because everything is frightening and we don't want to feel it. I hope none of us here have had that bad of an experience. But even if we have, there are ways that we can move beyond it freely and learn to trust the world, learn to experience the world as rich and full as it is. The trick is to tune in and to explore, to become like a newborn in this, landing in this new world, not knowing a thing about it, and exploring. Or as if you were a newspaper reporter and you were suddenly sent to a remote planet. I think we know too much about Mars for it to work there, but if we were sent to a completely unknown planet and we were to write about it, what did we find there? Well, we had no expectations other than perhaps that we wouldn't know what we would find. We had no frame of reference except perhaps our history, but perhaps this new planet or this newly arrived at planet is so different that there's no way to compare. Everything looks different. Everything is different. That's how to open to the practice, as if it were all brand new. This is spoken of in many ways by many of the teachers of the past. Shunryu Suzuki Roshi called it beginner's mind. And Sungsan Sunim called it only don't know. When we walk into an experience with no preconceived ideas about it, but a willingness to be open to the experience, it's quite amazing what can happen. But in order to get there, most of us have got a long trail of ideas about how we need to have things, about how things are. And it's about working through those, seeing through them, recognizing that they're simply ideas. As we get towards the edge of this recognition, fear can come up. Because if we're not this, then what are we? And if we can't say we're something, are we going to disappear? Are we going to fall out of the universe? Are we going to die? But as you tune in to that fear, and it may take some time, And I don't mean a few minutes or a few hours or a few days in sesshin. It could take a year, 2 years. But if you just walk into it to the degree that you can manage at a given time, when it gets to be close to overwhelming, then you back out just a little bit. And you'll know you've backed out when it turns two-dimensional, because if you're truly present with anything, it's three-dimensional. It's rich. It's fulfilling, no matter what it is. There's an expression in Zen, even garbage glitters like gold. So, it is only that we have ideas about what we are, what we have to be happy or fulfilled, whether we're happy or unhappy, whether we like our situation or not. It's only because of those that we're caught in suffering, basically, in fear, in anxiety, in anger, in sadness. This doesn't mean there are not things to be sad about or even angry about, but you'll see it differently, and you'll be able to work with it differently as you begin to unweave this tapestry. So we have these days ahead of us where we can really, really dive in. And again, when you find yourself feeling a certain way, like it's got to be this, or you don't like that in terms of how you're feeling, then tune in and explore that sensation in your body more clearly and more thoroughly and more delicately and more subtly. And suddenly you find yourself in a very rich part of Zen practice. And you keep going, and gradually, even more so, you become free. It is a long process, but it was a long process getting caught. So not to worry about how long it takes, because that you're taking even one step in that direction is phenomenal. So I thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.